Hey folks, tonight we're stepping into the flickering candlelit halls and hushed whispers of medieval weddings. Picture this. A young bride in a heavy velvet gown, stitched by hand, her hair braided with ribbons, and beneath her corset something oddly pungent. Garlic, not just for flavor in the kitchen, but tucked right into the folds of her dress like a sacred charm. Why? Well, let's find out. And while we drift, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is on your side of the moon. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine a stone chapel cooled by centuries. At the altar, the bride stands motionless, and if you leaned close enough, you might catch a sharp scent, not from perfume, but from cloves of garlic sewn into the seam of her sleeve. Far from culinary accident, this was a deliberate act one, steeped in a deep, uneasy belief system. In medieval Europe, garlic was more than a cooking staple. It was thought to be one of the most potent protective herbs, capable of repelling sickness, warding off evil spirits, and even deterring the dreaded evil eye, that notorious unseen glance thought to bring misfortune or infertility. And when you were about to enter marriage's step, it carried real risk, mystery, and physical vulnerability. Every scrap of protection was welcome. Weddings were liminal spaces, hanging halfway between the sacred and the profane. The bride was believed to be particularly susceptible to otherworldly forces during this in-between moment. Spirits could slip through, spells could land, and the wrong energy might curse a union before the first kiss. So women tucked garlic into hems, pockets, and even braided cloves into their hair. Think of it like an old-world version of airport security. But instead of removing your shoes, you stuffed your sleeves with stinky plant bulbs. Garlic's association with protection went back even further to Roman and Greek folk customs. It was used in childbirth, buried at crossroads to confuse spirits, and chewed to prevent plague. It might not have been minty fresh, but it was reassuring. And it wasn't always worn discreetly. Sometimes it was proudly visible, swinging from necklaces like a string of pearls. If pearls were wrinkled and sharp-smelling, onlookers might have muttered jokes, but they understood the gesture. Besides, a little garlic was better than inviting a mischievous sprite to your wedding night. It wasn't only evil spirits brides were worried about. Many feared jealous neighbors or scorned ex-suitors might sneak in a curse. Garlic worked like invisible armor, silent and fragrant. In some villages, this tradition evolved into an entire wedding preparation ritual. The bride would be rubbed with garlic oil, or steep in a bath infused with garlic and mugwort, another protective herb. If that sounds more like soup than a spa day, well, medieval self-care had its quirks. And speaking of quirks, there was a lesser-known tradition in parts of Eastern Europe where garlic was placed directly into the bride's shoes, yes, inside them. She would literally walk on garlic all the way to the altar, absorbing its power through the soles of her feet. If her shoes squeaked, no one blamed nerves. But perhaps the most touching part of this peculiar habit was how often it was carried out by the bride's mother or aunts. These older women would prepare the garlic with quiet reverence, whispering blessings as they sewed or tucked it into the gown. It was a silent exchange of wisdom, a maternal passing of protection from one generation to the next. And garlic didn't stop at weddings. Many newlywed couples hung braids of garlic above their bed for the first week of marriage, sometimes even longer, especially if the husband had a cold. Medieval honeymoon sweets smelled ... robust. Over time, as medical science advanced and spiritual practices shifted, these customs faded, but echoes remain. The idea of something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue? Garlic might not fit any of those categories officially, but it certainly carried the weight of tradition. And before you wrinkle your nose too much, remember, in a world without antibiotics, central heating, or reliable midwives, these rituals were comfort blankets. Garlic was a tool, a friend, a fragrant guardian wrapped snugly beneath brocade and lace. So the next time you peel a clove in your kitchen, think of a nervous 14th century bride, holding her breath as she steps into a church filled with smoke, song, and superstition, and a little something extra hidden in her sleeve. As we move gently from the sharp scent of garlic to the delicate shimmer of lace, let's follow our medieval bride a little further down the aisle. Her dress rustling faintly, her breath shallow with nerves. Beneath her veil, there's more than modesty at play. That fine mesh of fabric often carried secret meanings, quietly stitched into every inch. You see, medieval veils weren't always the pristine white symbols of purity we think of today. They were layered with significance. Quite literally, some veils were lined with tiny charms, prayers, or embroidered symbols of luck and protection, most of which never caught the eye of the average wedding guest. In fact, bridal veils were seen as a spiritual shield. Just as garlic protected from evil, the veil formed a barrier between the bride and the unseen forces swirling around our wedding day. The veil didn't just keep suitors or prying eyes at bay. It was there to hide her from demons, spirits, and any stray curses looking to ruin the mood. Picture it, intricate embroidery hidden in the hem, tiny shapes of stars, crosses, spirals, or even animals, all believed to carry protective or fertile power. In some regions, women sewed in knots, yes, literal knots of thread that represented the binding power of marriage. One knot for fidelity, one for a healthy child, one for long life. A medieval Etsy wish list, all woven into gauze. Some brides even requested specific symbols depending on their fears or hopes. A girl marrying into a colder region might stitch a sun into her veil, invoking warmth and health. Another might tuck in an acorn, the symbol of growth. It wasn't always about magic. It was also about sending a message. And then there was color. Believe it or not, veils weren't always white. Blue was considered the most traditional hue for purity, thanks to its connection with the Virgin Mary. Brides often chose pale blue veils with silver thread. Sometimes veils were even crimson or gold, particularly in wealthier households or royal weddings. The point wasn't to match the napkins. It was to signal status, fertility, and divine favor. Here's a lovely little detail. In some communities, the veil was handed down from mother to daughter, and along the way, each generation added a single new stitch. A small heart, a flower, initials. Over decades, the veil became a quiet family record, an heirloom woven from love and lavender-scented linen. But not all stitching was visible. In some cases, the bride's mother or maid would secretly stitch a charm or phrase on the inside of the veil, where it would rest softly against the bride's hair or cheek. These were quiet prayers. Words like Salus, Amor, or even full Latin blessings meant to stay close to the skin, whispering their protection without anyone else knowing. Some of the embroidery was even soundless poetry. Medieval women often used runes, ancient symbols, to code their hopes and dreams into the fabric. It was a personal spellbook worn on the head, held by a silver pin and centuries of belief. And then, at the appointed hour, the veil would be lowered. Slowly, carefully, not just for show, but to mark a transformation. The woman behind the veil was no longer a daughter or a maiden. She was entering the next phase of her life. And once the ceremony was done, some communities burned the veil in a sacred hearth, as if to release its blessings and seal the marriage with invisible smoke. Others kept the veil hidden for decades, only to bring it out during childbirth, illness, or another family wedding times when its old magic might still have something left to give. All this from a simple length of gauze. A veil wasn't just fabric, it was armor, prayer, family history, hope stitched by moonlight, and a reminder that even in a world ruled by men, women found quiet ways to wield their own power with thread, with symbols, with soft protection that no one else could see. So next time you pass by a bridal shop window and admire the floating lace on display, imagine it shimmering under torchlight, laced with the scent of incense and secrets, humming softly with the wishes of generations. There's more behind that veil than meets the eye. Now let's step even closer to the bride, not too close. She's probably nervous, and take a look at something pinned delicately to her bodice, or perhaps twined into her belt. It might look like a small bouquet, or maybe just a tuft of dried leaves. But this isn't decorative. This is medicine, and a message. In the Middle Ages, bridal adornments were often more than pretty flowers. They were herbal brooch bundles of herbs like rosemary, sage, rue, and thyme, tied with ribbon, pinned with bone or metal, and worn like a quiet badge of intention. These were symbols and safeguards, and they carried meanings the couple and their families would have instantly understood. Take rosemary, for instance, still used today in weddings as a nod to memory and fidelity. It was thought to stimulate the mind, protect the soul, and purify the air. Some brides wore a sprig tucked into their sleeves, while others carried it openly, hoping its scent would calm wedding day jitters. And let's be honest, when your dress weighs 40 pounds and your corset is winning the war against your ribs, you need calming. Then there's rue, a bitter little herb with a name that sounds like a warning. Known as the herb of grace, it was believed to protect against illness and misfortune. But it also symbolized sorrow, especially for past mistakes. Some brides chose to wear it openly, others avoided it. It's said that older women mothers, midwives, might sneak a sprig into the bridal bundle anyway, just in case. A secret seasoning of realism in the recipe of romance. Thyme, with its tiny green leaves and soft fragrance, symbolized courage. Wearing thyme on your wedding day wasn't just a pretty touch. It was a whispered reminder to face the unknown with bravery. Because let's be real, in a world without anesthesia, washing machines, or couples counseling, marriage was a high-stakes leap. Sometimes these herb bundles were handed to the bride by her female relatives in a small, pre-ceremony moment. No pomp, just quiet hands pressing plants into her palm. A subtle ritual of support. And we can't forget lavender. Still used in sachets and soaps, it represented purity and devotion. Brides might tuck lavender into their girdles, or blend it into a small pouch tied around the waist. Some brides even crushed lavender buds into their shoes, which made walking down the aisle a surprisingly aromatic experience. Here's something sweet. It was a custom in some English villages where the bride would hand out little nosegays of herbs to each of her bridesmaids and female guests. It was part gift, part blessing, a gentle thank you, wrapped in leaves and stems. Of course, not all herbs were so wholesome. Some brides were known to include more suspicious plants, like tansy or fennel, believed to influence fertility or act as natural birth control, depending on how they were used. Let's just say that some bundles had a little more bite than bouquet. In wealthier households, these herbs weren't just worn, they were gilded. Sprigs of rosemary dipped in gold leaf, or sage bundled with silk thread and pearls. It was a way to show status while still honoring the old traditions. A glittering talisman, half perfume, half protection. And like the veils and garlic, these herbal adornments often had lives beyond the wedding day. Some were dried and stored in boxes for years, to be burned during childbirth, sewn into clothing during plagues, or ground into tea during a bad fever. Others were buried in gardens to grow the couple's good fortune. A few even became part of love charms. If you tied your bridal herbs into a ribbon and placed them under your pillow on the first night, it was said to bring sweet dreams and loyal love. If your husband snored, well, maybe not quite as sweet. It's funny, isn't it? We think of flowers and herbs as simple, aesthetic things. But to a medieval bride, each stem was a sentence, each leaf a whispered hope or silent shield. In a world full of uncertainties, disease, childbirth, arranged marriages, and fickle fortune, What could be more comforting than carrying a garden of protection against your heart? So as you drift now, imagine walking down a candlelit corridor, the scent of crushed lavender rising with every step, rosemary brushing against silk, and your hands cool around a bundle of fragrant strength. These weren't just herbs. They were love letters written in green. The wedding is underway, but something unusual is happening. The sky outside is dark not from storm clouds, but because the ceremony is being held at night. Not all medieval weddings happened in daylight. In fact, in some regions, it was considered safer to marry beneath the moon, when the veil between worlds was thinner, but oddly, also more cooperative. Welcome to the quiet magic of moonlit processions. Picture a winding village path lit by flickering torches and the silvery sheen of moonlight on cobblestones. The bride walks slowly, her face mostly hidden behind her charm-woven veil, herbs clutched in her hands, and garlic still warming under her bodice. Beside her, family members hum soft tunes, some in Latin, others in local dialects, murmuring blessings into the breeze. So why a nighttime wedding? Surely daylight was better for seeing the guests, the feast, the pageantry? But nighttime wasn't about seeing, it was about sensing. In many medieval cultures, especially across parts of Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean, nightfall was thought to be a protective cloak. Spirits were sleepy. Enemies, jealous neighbors, and wandering eyes were less likely to interfere. Some believed that marriage ceremonies held under the waxing moon would invite fertility, while waning moons helped couples leave behind old troubles such as past relationships, debts, or family grudges. Timing was everything. Some weddings were planned to the minute, beginning just as the moon reached its zenith. In farming communities, this was thought to sow the couple's future at the most fertile time. It sounds poetic until you remember that people would sometimes wait in the cold, swatting away insects and shivering in their ceremonial garb, just for that one perfect celestial moment. But the symbolism was worth it. Lanterns were lit in special patterns, sometimes forming spirals or circle, to honor the moon goddess or to confuse wandering spirits. Children were often the ones to carry these lanterns, believing their innocence added an extra layer of spiritual protection. That's right. Kids with candles were the ghost repellent of the Middle Ages. And the songs, they weren't just for celebration. They were often lullabies for the spirits. Slow, melodic chants meant to soothe any lingering souls who might otherwise crash the party. Some included ancient verses thought to pacify jealous fairies or summon ancestral blessings. Picture a wedding DJ, but it's your aunt whispering in Latin. Sometimes, instead of walking directly to the church or feast hall, the procession would loop around the village, a symbolic circling of the land, asking it to bless the marriage. In remote areas, the couple would even be led past the graves of their ancestors, pausing briefly for a silent nod or prayer. It sounds morbid, but for them, it was a way of gathering strength from the past. There were even moon-based wedding omens. If a dog howled during the ceremony, it meant trouble, unless the bride's bouquet contained rue. If a breeze moved the bride's veil during her vows, it was said to be a good sign, as if fate itself were listening and approving. And if a bat flew overhead, that could go either way, depending on the region. Some thought it a symbol of rebirth. Others saw it as a demonic interloper. Either way, it definitely got mentioned. One of the most enchanting customs was the moon mirror ritual. After the ceremony, the bride would briefly look into a bowl of water reflecting the moon. It was said that if her reflection rippled, her marriage would be full of children and laughter. If the reflection was still and perfect, it meant quiet wealth and long years. If no reflection appeared, well, let's just say that was a good time to grab more garlic. There's a soft beauty in all this. The idea that people timed their most important life events, not by schedules or venues, but by the stars and seasons. It was a way of aligning their fragile human hope with the vast rhythm of the cosmos. And after the ceremony, the couple would often walk home through the quiet, following a path lit by friends and family holding candles or torches. No dancing yet, no feast. Just soft footsteps, a hiss of wind through the trees, and perhaps a few quiet songs drifting on the air. A night for reflection and for holding hands under ancient constellations. So as you rest your head now, imagine the sky above dotted with stars, a full moon watching quietly as two people take that first trembling step into a shared future. No noise, no spotlights, just the hush of old beliefs and silver light on stone. Now we enter the home, or perhaps a tent, where the wedding feast will unfold long tables, flickering candles, and a crackling hearth casting shadows that dance across the stone floor. The bride, no longer just a daughter or niece, is now a wife. And in her arms, tucked inside a wooden chest or wrapped in embroidered cloth, is her dowry. Ah, the dowry. Often reduced in our minds to a pile of coins or livestock, but in reality, it was a bundle of quiet hopes, whispered worries, and social signals packed with far more meaning than met the eye. Tonight, let's gently unpack what that humble collection of household goods actually meant, and why its weight, both literal and symbolic, mattered so much. Imagine a small box filled with linen sheets, wooden spoons, maybe a modest silver cup, or a folded woolen cloak. No dragons, no gold, no glitter. And yet, each item was chosen with care, sometimes blessed by the local priest, or smudged with rosemary smoke by the bride's mother. Piece of the bride's former life, carried into her new one. These items weren't just tools, they were shields. The sheets symbolized purity, yes, but also preparedness for domestic life. Pots and pans meant she would never go hungry. Candles, sometimes handmade by the bride herself, were a promise of light through long winters. Even the smallest things had weight. A hand-carved comb might represent beauty, or a broom, the quiet promise of cleanliness and order in the home. And then there were the secret items. A thimble for fertility, a tiny carved charm hidden under the cushion of a stool, or a wooden spoon with the initials of the bride's mother burned gently into the handle. These little gifts weren't just practical, they were spells made visible, anchors of love and comfort. The dowry also functioned like a private resume. It was a declaration of what the bride brought to the marriage, not just in material terms, but in virtue. Industriousness, humility, thrift, beauty. It said, I can care for a home. I am worth trusting. And yes, it was also a financial cushion, but it rarely came with glittering jewels. Most brides brought soap and blankets, and a good kettle. In some regions, a special table was laid out the day before the wedding just to display the dowry. Guests would walk by, admire the needlework, comment on the fine hinges of the storage trunk. It was part ritual, part social theater, part passive-aggressive bragging rights. Think of it as the medieval version of Instagram. Look at this loom-woven tablecloth. #blessed. The symbolism ran even deeper. In parts of rural France and Italy, brides would place a small loaf of bread into the dowry chest to ensure the family would never go hungry. In Scandinavia, a stone or small figurine from the bride's childhood garden might be included, meant to ground her new life in the strength of her old one. Dowries even had emotional fail-safes. One fascinating custom involved placing a single coin, wrapped in cloth, at the bottom of the chest, something to be used only in the direst emergency. If a widow found herself destitute, that coin might be the only thing between her and starvation. It was both practical and deeply poignant. One last kiss from her girlhood, tucked away for a rainy day. But don't be fooled, dowries weren't always modest. Wealthier families turned them into theatrical events, arriving at the groom's home with entire carts filled with furniture, fabric bolts, spices, and imported oils. In Florence, brides were sometimes gifted entire streets worth of fabric. And while yes, these things were economic bargaining chips, They were also loaded with deeply felt meanings. Some items were considered too risky to include. Mirrors, for example, were avoided in many areas. Reflective surfaces were believed to trap spirits or bring bad luck. If one broke during the wedding procession, it was an ill omen, often requiring an emergency blessing or protective charm to counteract. And just like the veil or bouquet, the dowry often included subtle layers of superstition. Salt was common wrapped in cloth and tied with red thread to ward off bad luck. A small blade or needle was sometimes tucked beneath the lining of the chest, sharp enough to cut any curses. These were secret weapons, invisible to the guests, but well understood by the women who packed them. After the wedding, the dowry chest wasn't tucked away or forgotten. It often became a central piece of the new household, used to store linens, children's clothes, sometimes even birth charms or funeral keepsakes. It aged alongside the family. It listened silently to every milestone. So tonight, as we picture the bride seated at the long feast table, her new name whispered into the air, let's not forget the humble dowry chest at her feet. It holds more than towels. It holds generations of guidance, stitched into fabric and softened by hands that loved her long before she wore that dress. The feast has begun. Laughter swells, bread is broken, wine poured generously, at least where it's allowed, and somewhere, just above the merriment, candlelight flickers with a quiet drama all its own. Not every guest notices, but those who do might lean in just slightly. Because in the medieval world, candlelight wasn't just romantic atmosphere. It was sacred, superstitious, and downright feared at times. Tonight, we step into the glow and shadows of soft candles and dark superstitions. Imagine long beeswax tapers burning slowly down the banquet table, their flames dancing gold in the drafty air. These were more than sources of light. They were considered spiritual sentinels. A candle could protect the space, chase away evil, or even if mishandled, invite disaster. Let's start with the basics. Candle flames were seen as alive. That might sound poetic now, but back then, it was taken quite literally. A strong, steady flame during a wedding was a good sign, symbolic of a stable marriage, a steady household, and mutual respect. But a flickering flame? Or one that suddenly died? That was cause for concern. Some guests would cross themselves. Others might quietly excuse themselves to mutter a protective charm under their breath. The room would seem a bit colder, just for a moment. There were even regional sayings about it. In parts of rural Germany, if a bride's candle guttered during the ceremony, it meant the marriage would burn short. In England, they feared a candle that crackled loudly. It was said to speak of quarrels. No one wanted drama that early in the evening. And don't even think about letting a candle blow out during the vows. Some ceremonies appointed a dedicated flame watcher, usually a younger sibling or godchild, whose only job was to guard the bride's ceremonial candle. If it went out, the whole ritual might be paused, relit, and blessed again from scratch. No pressure, Timmy. Now let's talk about the candles themselves. These weren't your average store-bought tea lights. Wedding candles were often made from special wax, sometimes mixed with herbs like lavender, thyme, or mugwort to infuse protective energy. A few traditions involved using wax from church candles, believed to carry divine favor. In some Slavic customs, the candle used during the wedding was passed down to children, to be lit again during childbirth or illness. The light of the wedding, carrying forward. There was a sweet tradition in parts of France where a couple would light a single candle together, each holding the taper, and then joining their flames to one large wick. The symbolism is clear. Two lights, one shared flame. But don't let go too soon. It was considered bad luck if the wick didn't catch right away. The couple would sometimes keep trying again and again, nervously laughing while Aunt Matilda muttered about what that means. Once lit, the candles needed to be watched. Blowing one out was almost never allowed. To extinguish a wedding candle by breath, especially the bride's, was to symbolically blow away part of the soul. Instead, they'd be snuffed out carefully with a bell-shaped extinguisher, sometimes made of silver and passed from grandmother to granddaughter. The final puff of smoke rising like a tiny whisper to the heavens. And if a candle melted into strange shapes? Oh, the interpretations. If the wax pooled into something resembling a heart, it meant passionate love. If it cracked down the center, some saw it as a warning of division. There were even candle readers, yes, actual people invited just to interpret the flow of wax like medieval fortune tellers. We might chuckle now, but back then, people clung to these meanings like weather reports for the soul. One tradition that might surprise you involved candlelight games. After the feast, younger guests would sometimes play a game where a single candle was placed in the center of the room, and each person would try to pass their hands over the flame without getting burned. Sounds dangerous, and it probably was, but the idea was symbolic. Who could handle passion without harm? Who would dance close to danger and come away stronger? In other regions, couples would hold candles as they lay in bed the first night, watching the wax drip onto a plate between them. If the wax blobs touched, it was a sign of future harmony. If the flames leaned toward each other, even better. If they pulled apart, well, let's just say that's when you'd pull out the extra garlic under the mattress. There was a peculiar custom in Ireland, where one final candle, called the nightlight of vows, was left burning alone in the room after the bride and groom retired. It was meant to burn out on its own. If it lasted until morning, it was a sign the couple's love would endure. If it sputtered early, people might not say anything, but they definitely noticed. Of course, some of this came from practical fears. Fire was a very real danger. One gust of wind or one unsteady elbow in a celebration could turn tragic. But over time, these fears transformed into layers of folklore, becoming rituals that soothed and guided more than they warned. So tonight, imagine the soft flicker of golden candlelight reflected in the silver goblet beside your hand. You sip slowly, watch the wax curl down like a lazy river of light, and know that somewhere in the silence between flames, someone is hoping, watching, wishing for a love that burns steady and sweet. The feast begins to wind down. Plates have been scraped clean, crumbs gathered by scurrying dogs underfoot, and the fire's embers settle into a quiet glow. The guests are full, perhaps a bit wine-sleepy, and attention drifts now toward a much smaller object, a simple, shining ring. The medieval wedding ring wasn't just a circle of gold, it was a sacred loop of binding energy. A symbol, yes, but also a tool, a charm, and sometimes a deeply personal artifact with a curious history. Tonight, we turn our gaze to the ring rituals and polishing that defined love, loyalty, and a touch of enchantment. First, imagine the ring. Not always golden, not always new. Many were forged from iron, bronze, or tin, and often passed down through generations. Even a chipped or warped ring could hold great power, not because of its appearance, but because of its story. In some families, it was considered a blessing to be married with your grandmother's ring, especially if she was known for her strong marriage, her fierce cooking, or her ability to keep chickens from wandering into the neighbor's yard. Before the wedding, the ring went through a quiet process of cleansing. Some families bathed it in wine or rosewater. Others passed it through incense smoke or laid it overnight on a Bible or under the family hearth. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was purification, washing away the past, blessing the future. There was even a tradition, in certain remote villages, of polishing the ring with ashes from a sacred fire, particularly if the fire had been used to light candles during a baptism or funeral. Ashes from life's thresholds, cleansing and charging the metal. A full symbolic circle. And polishing wasn't just a task for servants. Sometimes the bride herself would polish the ring under the supervision of an older aunt or midwife. The act was more than physical. It was ritual. While she worked, she might be expected to recite a short prayer or affirmation under her breath. Something like, "As I polish this band, may love hold my hand." Rhyming wasn't required, but it did help with memory. Now, as the moment of exchange arrived, there was often a distinct order. In some parts of medieval Europe, the groom would place the ring first on the bride's thumb, saying, "In the name of the Father," then to her index finger, "the Son," and finally settling it on the third finger with, "and the Holy Spirit." That's why the ring finger is where it is today, spiritually charged, anatomically believed to carry a vein directly to the heart. Of course, not everyone followed the same rules. In certain Jewish traditions of the time, rings were enormous, almost crown-like creations, worn briefly during the ceremony and then replaced. These rings weren't made for daily wear. They were declarations, nearly architectural in their structure, sometimes designed to resemble miniature houses, temples, or even castles. The symbolism? That the home they would build together was already shining in miniature form. In contrast, some Christian brides wore tiny, nearly invisible rings, thread-thin gold bands worn under gloves or sleeves. Not to hide them, but to keep them close and safe. The idea was that love should be protected, even from sight. Sometimes rings bore inscriptions, tiny etched phrases like "Amor vincit omnia" or "Tu mon cur." If you were particularly bold, you might even have the names etched in, though space was limited and the tools were crude. Still, it was love's graffiti, pressed into metal. Now here's a curious practice. If a ring was lost or broken in the first year of marriage, it wasn't just an accident, it was an event. Friends and family would gather, re-bless the new ring, sometimes involving a mini ceremony to repair the symbolic circle. It wasn't just a replacement, it was a symbolic repair of vows, a spiritual band-aid for the marriage. And then there were the dreamers. Some girls, long before their weddings, would sleep with rings under their pillows, hoping to dream of their future husbands. Others would wear a ring on a chain and dip it into water under moonlight, reciting rhymes to summon a vision of their fate. Love, in the medieval world, wasn't always passive. Sometimes it took a bit of magical meddling. In a few remote English hamlets, it was believed that polishing a ring with fresh dew on the morning of your wedding could protect the marriage from lies. Truth in the morning brings truth for life, they'd say. You can imagine brides sneaking into gardens at dawn, ring clenched tight in chilled fingers, whispering blessings into the mist. Even after the ceremony, the ring's work wasn't done. It was worn, always, on the left hand to keep it near the heart. But if trouble came, illness, misfortune, quarrels, the ring might be removed briefly and laid in a bowl of milk or wine overnight. In some cases, it would be carried to a shrine for re-blessing. This wasn't superstition alone. It was the quiet desperation of people trying to bind their love with every tool they had. And every time the ring was touched, fiddled nervously during arguments, twisted absent-mindedly in joy, it whispered all its history back, that it had been polished with holy fire, that it had been held by trembling hands under candlelight, that it was, in the end, a circle, no beginning, no end, just love, again and again. So tonight, let your mind rest on that glint of gold, passed between hands under a stone archway centuries ago. A promise made solid. A heart worn on a finger. We've wandered through veils, herbs, and rings under torchlight. Now let your imagination drift downward to the bride's feet. Not the battlefield of tightly laced boots or muddy traveler's sandals, but something decidedly softer. The footwear of feather and silk that medieval brides often wore, and the whispered beliefs woven into every stitch. Picture the scene. A frosty morning, dew still clinging to the grass outside the chapel, and inside, the bride's attendants kneel before her. They unlace the heavy wooden clogs or boots she's worn on the journey here, and carefully replace them with slippers fashioned from the finest fabrics available, silks spun in distant lands. velvet as deep as a moonless night, sometimes trimmed with feathers or beads. The fit is snug but gentle, poised between comfort and ceremony. Why such delicate shoes when the path ahead might include rough stones or slick floors? Because these weren't merely practical items, they were symbols and silent spells. The slipper represented the bride's transition from the rugged uncertainty of courtship to the more delicate, mysterious realm of marriage. With each soft step, she left behind her single life and entered a new world. In England and France, the tradition was to gift slippers embroidered with small images: birds for happiness, lily for purity, even tiny shoes for fertility, cunningly stitched near the toes. Some brides had tiny words woven in gold thread inside their soles, secrets meant only for their own feet to carry. Fortuna Fortis, or Sapientia Manet. No one else would see these messages. They were personal affirmations to guide her with each step. Feathers were another curious embellishment. Ostrich plumes, imported expense, symbolized lightness of spirit. A bride in feathered slippers was, in essence, declaring that her heart felt as free as the bird. But feathers could also serve a protective role. In some villages, it was believed that soft down clinging to the toes would tickle away evil thoughts or mischievous imps trying to trip her up literally and figuratively. Silk, too, carried meaning. In parts of Italy, silk slippers dyed a blush pink or pale gold were preferred, since those colors were thought to attract gentle dreams and calm the nerves. Brides might even brush their slippers with a drop of rosewater or violet oil, infusing their walk with fragrance believed to soothe anxiety. And then there were the secret slippers, the ones hidden beneath their fine counterparts. In cooler climates, a bride might wear 2 layers: a warm inner slipper made of wool or felt to guard against cold and chills. Between the 2 layers, some women tucked small charms: an acorn for strength, a shred of their mother's apron for guidance, or even a tiny bell that would jingle if someone approached too closely, deterring uninvited visitors on the wedding night. Not every region favored slippers, though. In parts of Scandinavia, brides went barefoot for the first few steps after the ceremony, believing that direct contact with the earth would root the marriage in stability. But once they reached the bridal chamber, velvet slippers would await them, as if the ground itself had gifted them a soft landing into their new life. Then there's the curious French custom of the semelle de chance, or lucky insole. Before stitching the slipper closed, a small paper inscribed the groom's name, or sometimes a secret love note, would be glued under the insole. Only the bride knew of its presence, carrying her husband's name with each step. If she ever lost her footing in life, she could be reassured that she literally had his name underfoot. Footwear was also a matter of display. At banquets, brides were often encouraged to dance, and when they did, the movement of silk and feathers would catch the torchlight in a gentle shimmer. Guests took note of how gracefully she moved. A stumble could be joked about, foxing conversation, or worse, whispered as an omen. The slipper, then, carried the burden of both style and superstition. In wealthier courts, footwear could be lavish indeed. Shoes carved from ivory or softened leather, embroidered with pearls and gemstones, sometimes even tipped with small bells that trilled softly with each step like a joyful herald. One record from a Burgundian wedding tells of silk slippers, lined with rabbit fur and trimmed in silver wire, so intricate it mimicked the weave of a spider's web. The bride wore them only once, but the memory lingered for decades in the court's gossip. And let's not forget the practical side. Medieval floors were often cold, damp, and strewn with straw. Delicate slippers protected against blight and discomfort, keeping the bride's steps light and her feet warm. But even this practicality became wrapped in lore. Wearing fine slippers demonstrated that a husband would care for her needs, provide comfort, and keep her safe from harm and unspoken vow with each cushioned step. When the ceremony ended and the feasting began, there was sometimes a small ritual of the turning of the shoes. The bride would sit, and her attendants would remove the slippers, turn them around, and place them at the entrance to the bridal chamber. This backward placement was believed to confuse any lingering spirits or unlucky guests, steering misfortune away from the newlywed's bed. Later, these slippers often found a second life. They might be stuffed with herbs and hung in the home as a talisman, or buried under the hearthstone during renovations, ensuring that the protection walked not only into the marriage, but into the house itself. So tonight, as you tuck your own feet under soft covers, imagine those feathered, silk-lined slippers gliding across stone floors. Feel the tiny weights of talismans and secret messages beneath your toes. And remember, in a world of uncertainty, every step was an act of faith, every stitch a silent spell, and every soft shoe a promise of care to come. The banquet hall is silent for a moment. The crackle of hearth embers the only sound as waitstaff adjust platters of venison and bowls of spiced porridge. Then, slowly, laughter rises again, though not all of it human. You see, these medieval nuptial feasts sometimes invited a very special kind of guest, the ghosts who lingered between worlds. In many regions, especially in the British Isles and parts of Scandinavia, it was believed that the boundary between the living and the dead thinned around major life events, births, funerals, and yes, weddings. Spirits of ancestors, unquiet souls, or even the occasional mischievous revenant might drift into the hall, drawn by music, food, and the powerful emotions swirling in the air. Brides and grooms expected these spectral visitors. In fact, preparations for the feast often included special seats-empty chairs placed at the high table and set with ceremonial bread, salt, or honey wine. This humble offering was meant to welcome benevolent ancestors, appease them with taste and respect, and ensure they bless the couple's union rather than resent it. Imagine the bride pausing mid-laugh as a sudden chill ripples through the guests. A distant clatter of silverware without any visible hand, or a faint whisper carried on the draft through a hidden window. Courtiers might glance at one another, eyebrows raised, before raising goblets to silent toasts that included both the living and those no longer among them. Sometimes, families went a step further and left an entire course, often something simple, like a crust of black bread or a small plate of cheese on a side table, designated pro mortuis. It was never touched by living hands until after midnight, when it was quietly removed and buried beneath a tree near the churchyard. This ritual was a kind of spiritual recycling, returning nourishment to the earth and to the spirits who were believed to roam the land. In Yorkshire, there was a curious tradition. A young boy or girl would carry an empty cup through the hall, offering it to each guest, and then placing it in a corner by the hearth. The child represented the living future, and the cup became a vessel for messages from departed relatives. After the feast, the cup would be taken outside, and if the breeze nudged it or rattled it against the wall, that was seen as a sign of approval from beyond. Music, too, played a spectral role. Minstrels often learned special lament-soft, elegiac tunes meant to honor the ancestors. Between lively ballads about courtship and bold dances, these laments were woven in, a reminder that love and life were part of a larger tapestry. Even the most upbeat tune might end abruptly as the fiddler struck a single, sustained note, allowing guests to bow their heads in silent remembrance. But not all ghostly visits were welcome. Some believed that unpleased or forgotten spirits could cause mischief at the feast, spilling wine, tipping chairs, or even snuffing out candles. To guard against pranks, it was customary for one of the groomsmen to carry an iron nail or horseshoe symbols of strength and safety, circling the hall 3 times before the first toast. There were tales of particularly stubborn specters. In one Cornish village, an old lady who died just weeks before her granddaughter's wedding was known to appear on the staircase, her pale face framed by candlelight, before vanishing into thin air. The bride's mother, armed with prayers and a silver bell, managed to coax the spirit to a final rest by offering the widow's favorite slice of honey cake left conspicuously on the table. Sometimes, the presence of ghosts influenced the feast itself. Dishes believed to please the dead, like boiled eggs or monkfish, were served early in the evening. Guests would eat quietly, paying homage to those who might be watching. Only after these spirit-friendly courses did the more indulgent meats and sweets make their appearance. And then there were the silent moments. As the couple shared their first dance, the music would briefly pause, and everyone would stand still, listening for unseen applause or footsteps. A passing breeze that lifted a veil or tousled a fringe was taken as a heartfelt blessing. In some places, this pause was called the breath of the ancestors, a collective inhalation shared by the living and the dead. Sometimes, the ghostly mix led to odd practical customs. Plates and cups destined for the living were marked with small notches or colored threads so the spirits wouldn't sample them. One can imagine a startled guest realizing they almost sipped from a ghost cup, only to notice the missing prong on its handle and swap it quickly for their own. When the feast ended, there was often a gentle ritual to see the spirits off. The bride herself might lead a procession out into the courtyard, carrying a single lit taper, singing a lullaby to guide the ancestors back to their rest. Or a small fire might be built just outside the hall, the bride tossing the remains of the pro mortuus offerings into the flames, releasing both smoke and gratitude into the night air. By the end of the evening, living and dead had shared the space harmoniously, each honoring the other. The couple, hand in hand, would be escorted to their chamber by living attendants, leaving the ghosts to their own quiet wandering, or perhaps to the whispered tales that would last through the generations. So as you settle down tonight, remember, every clap, whisper, and shared gaze at a medieval wedding feast carried more than mere merriment. It echoed across the veil between worlds. And in that delicate balance of life and death, love found its most haunting, beautiful rhythm. The feasting slows. Candles flicker low. The bride and groom, tired but glowing, are gently led away, not to privacy quite yet, but to the strange ritual of the bridal bed blessing, a moment that was part devotion, part drama, and entirely unforgettable in the medieval wedding journey. You see, in many parts of medieval Europe, the wedding wasn't fully complete until the bed was formally blessed. And we're not just talking about a priest saying a few words over a mattress. No, this was a carefully staged moment, one that fused religion, folklore, family pride, and community supervision into something equal parts awkward and ceremonial. Let's begin with the room itself. Picture a chamber lined with heavy drapes to block out drafts and perhaps prying eyes. The bed is not a grand four-poster, as we might imagine today, but a sturdy wooden frame piled high with straw, linen, and woolen coverlets. Flowers might be scattered on top, rose petals for love, rosemary for remembrance, and yarrow for marital luck. Beneath the pillows, tucked away, might lie a sprig of rue or a tiny bone charm carved with the couple's initials. The bed is not empty. Before the couple enters, a priest or elder, sometimes both, approaches with candle and incense. He murmurs blessings in Latin, walking around the bed 3 times, occasionally sprinkling it with holy water. Each corner is touched, each side marked with a small cross. These gestures are meant to ward off evil spirits and protect the couple from nightmares, infertility, or worse unseen curses passed down through family lines. Sometimes, this ritual wasn't done by clergy at all. In smaller villages, it fell to the midwife, who was viewed as an earthly expert on the mysteries of bodies, babies, and the unseen. She might mutter charms under her breath, tap the headboard 3 times with a hazel rod, or rub the sheets with ash from a hearth that had never gone cold. Now comes the procession. Yes, that's right. In many traditions, the couple was led to their chamber in full view of their guests. Musicians played soft tunes, usually flutes or small harps, and women from both families walked ahead, scattering flower petals or holding lanterns aloft. Think of it like a bedtime parade. The idea wasn't to embarrass the couple, but to witness the beginning of their shared life. In medieval logic, what was seen was sealed. And here comes the strangest part, the ceremonial tucking in. In certain customs, the couple was tucked into bed together, while onlookers offered blessings. In Scotland and parts of Germany, it was traditional for one or two witnesses to sit in the room for a short time after the couple was tucked in. These were usually elderly relatives or trusted midwives. Their job? To bear witness, to make sure the couple accepted their bond. In some cases, to offer final words of wisdom before discreetly retreating behind a curtain. Now, don't worry, what followed wasn't a public affair. Once the door was closed, the room went quiet. The couple might share a few private tokens, a coin for fortune, a lock of hair for intimacy, or a whispered promise. And often, they would drink from the same cup, usually warm milk or spiced wine, before settling in. But the bed itself continued to play a symbolic role. Some families had an heirloom bedspread, passed from bride to bride, believed to carry the blessings of every woman who had lain beneath it. Others stitched protective symbols, like the crossed keys of St. Peter or the five-petaled rose, into the sheets or pillows. Even the color of the linens mattered. White was not universally used. Blue was favored in some places as a sign of fidelity, while red was believed to increase fertility and passion. Imagine lying beneath a scarlet quilt stitched by a grandmother's hands, each seam a silent prayer. Sometimes the entire bed was consecrated ahead of time. In Italy, a bride's family might place a small relic, perhaps a saint's medallion or a bone fragment, between the mattress and the frame. Its presence was thought to protect the couple during the mysterious transition from single to joined. In Spain, a painted cross was often added to the underside of the bed, not seen, just known. One odd but surprisingly common belief held that if you whispered a blessing directly into the mattress straw, the bed itself would remember and keep watch. Some mothers knelt beside the bed, murmuring phrases like, "Guard them in laughter, guard them in rest." It wasn't magic, exactly. It was maternal love, folded into the very fibers of the night. And here's a bit of humor, because even in all this ritual, people were still people. In many regions, guests would play gentle tricks on the couple's bed, hiding dried peas between the sheets or slipping in a small figurine of a baby. One infamous joke involved tying a small bell to the underside of the bed, so any movement triggered a comical chime. Mischievous, absolutely, but also a way of saying, "We love you, and we're watching," in the most awkwardly supportive way possible. Once the night wore on and the candles were snuffed, the room darkened, and all that remained was the warmth of wool, the scent of herbs, and the softness of breath beside another. And whether or not the spirits had stayed to listen, the blessing of the bed lingered stitched into the sheets, etched into the wood, wrapped around their dreams like a comforter of sacred promise. So as you close your eyes tonight, imagine resting beneath those ancient covers, feeling the hush of old voices around you, some seen, some not, and knowing that even the bed itself is keeping you safe. As the hush of the bridal chamber settles, our focus shifts from the visible trappings of marriage, the ring, the candlelit procession, to the hidden layers beneath the bride's gown. In a blend of practicality and protection, many medieval brides wore armor under petticoats, tucking small shields, talismans, and even metal scales into the soft folds of their skirts. This secret armory was less about warfare and more about emotional and spiritual defense as they ventured into married life. Picture the bride's ensemble: heavy linen shifts, voluminous skirts, and beneath them an underdress stiffened with layers of canvas or horsehair. Sewn into the innermost layers, where no curious hand could probe, were tiny iron shields, sometimes as small as a coin. These heart plates, as they were sometimes called, were thought to ward off curses aimed at the heart or womb. A bride believed that, with this hidden defense, no malicious spell or envious gaze could pierce her protective barrier. In some coastal regions, brides incorporated fish scales, often from a freshly salted cod, stitched discreetly into the hem. Fish scales were considered symbols of resilience, drawn from creatures that thrived beneath stormy seas. To wear them was to claim their steadfastness. Each scale was carefully cleaned, dried, and sometimes painted with simple designs before sewing, transforming humble kitchen scraps into potent talismans. Beyond shields and scales, small pouches of metal dust scrapings from old horses' shoes or remnants of worn armor were tucked into the waistband. The iron element itself was believed to repel evil spirits and fairies, creatures thought especially envious of human joy, and likely to target a bride on her wedding night. By incorporating iron directly against her skin, the bride created a continuous barrier, as if enveloped in a gentle, invisible chainmail. Some women went even further, wearing delicate chain segments hidden under layers of petticoats. Imagine thousands of tiny rings, each woven into the next, forming a soft mesh that rippled beneath silk. Unlike the heavy armor of knights, these miniature chains were light and flexible, sufficient to deflect ill will, but discreet enough to leave the silhouette unchanged. Talismans of other materials appeared alongside metal. In mountainous villages, brides tucked small stones, often jasper or hematite, into slits in the lining. These stones were believed to absorb negative energies, much like blotter paper soaks up ink. Others favored ceramic beads, glazed in bright colors, each hue corresponding to a specific blessing: green for fertility, blue for fidelity, red for passion. There was a quiet ritual to this preparation. On the eve of the wedding, the bride's female kin gathered in a dimly lit room. By candlelight, they brought out scraps of metal, odd stones, and lengths of chain. They murmured prayers, invoked ancestors' names, and spoke of the challenges the bride might face distant from home. In-laws' expectations, the physical strains of childbirth. With careful stitches, they bound these worries into the very fabric of her dress, transforming fear into fortified hope. In parts of Germany, brides carried an additional safeguard: a small iron spindle, about the length of a finger, sewn into a hidden pocket near the chest. Because spindles were tools of creation, turning raw wool into thread, they symbolized the bride's ability to create life and twist hardship into strength. If a jealous spirit approached, that spindle would act like a tiny lance, protecting her core. Carrying armor beneath skirts was not without discomfort. Some brides reported feeling the constant weight, a gentle pressure that served as a reminder of both their vulnerability and the love that shielded them. Others joked, once they were safe among family, that they felt like knights going into battle, though their enemy was more abstract: misfortune, gossip, and the unknown trials of marriage. The groom's attire sometimes mirrored this practice. A few grooms wore hidden leather or metal strips inside their doublets to guard against jealous rivals or political plots. But it was the bride's secret armory that carried sentimental weight. While the groom's protection leaned toward physical safety, the bride's focused on spiritual and emotional well-being. Once the couple settled into their new home, these hidden defenses remained in place for a time. In some households, it was customary to leave the metal talismans in the skirt for the first month of marriage. Then, on the night of the full moon following the wedding, the bride would remove them in a small rite, washing each piece in spring water, pressing it between cloths of lavender, and returning it to the family's treasure chest of wedding keepsakes. Over the years, these keepsakes might be brought out again for childbirth, for illness, or when the family faced hard times. Each piece carried a story: the shield that once sat over a daughter's heart, the fish scales that reminded a wife of her grandmother's courage, the chainmail that symbolized unbreakable love. In modern times, these customs have faded, replaced by simpler symbolic jewelry or the sentimental keepsakes tucked into wedding gowns. Yet, The essence remains. Marriage, much like a battlefield in its own right, calls for resilience, support, and sometimes hidden strength. So as you drift towards sleep now, picture that bride, the soft rustle of petticoats, the weight of metal against her heart. Feel the comfort of invisible armor, sewn with whispered prayers and steadfast love, shielding her as she steps into her new life ready for anything that might come. The hush of the bridal chamber grows deeper, the last embers of candlelight painting soft patterns on the walls. Our bride, cloaked in layered silk and secret armor, now focuses on the tight weave of her corset. Not merely a garment to shape her figure, the corset's lacing carried whispered promises, tiny knots woven into the ribbons, each one a hidden vow between heartbeats. Tonight, we unravel the lore of love knot laces, where affection was tied into every pull and pull of the strings. Imagine the corset's back, a lattice of flat ribbons or sturdy leather cords crisscrossed in perfect symmetry. As the bride's attendants, often her mother, grandmother, or the village midwife, pulled each loop snug, they tied a series of subtle knots. These weren't haphazard tangles. They were deliberate symbols, a code of love stitched into every twist. The ritual began with selecting the lace itself. In wealthier courts, ribbons of silk or velvet were preferred smooth. Luxurious strands dyed in pale blues, gentle blushes, or deep greens. In humbler homes, leather thongs or braided hemp cords served. Regardless of material, the cords represented the bond itself, strong, flexible, and capable of tightening against adversity. Each knot had meaning. The first knot honored the couple's friendship, a reminder that love must rest on steady companionship. The second knot symbolized trust, tied with extra care to ensure it would never slip. The third was for passion, a tighter loop, binding the heart closer to desire. The fourth represented fidelity, deliberately placed near the bride's spine to guard her resolve even in darkness. Some women added a fifth knot, an act of pure devotion, while others left gaps, believing that leaving space allowed love to grow. In villages across England, a tradition held that the fifth knot should be tied by the groom himself, but in secret. He would visit the bridal chamber just before dawn, slipping behind the closed door, and whisper a private wish into the lace as he tied it. If he succeeded without waking the household, it proved his gentle touch and true intentions. If he fumbled or woke the cat, well, that became part of the wedding tale for years to come. Another custom, common in parts of France, involved threads from the bride's childhood dress woven into the corset laces. These faded strands, soft and pale, intertwined with the new ribbons, blending past and present. Every knot carried memory. The day she first danced in her mother's gown, the stitches her grandmother made after a fall, the scent of lavender that clung to the fabric. When tied, the corset was not just her wedding attire, but a physical tapestry of her life's sweetest moments. The practical side of love knot laces cannot be ignored. A well-tied corset ensured the bride stood tall, her posture graceful for the long procession. But hidden within that structure was a softer truth. Every tug tightened both fabric and promise. The bride, breathing through bound ribs, felt each knot's hold, a gentle pressure reminding her of vows silently stitched into her very breath. Midwives often participated in this ritual, adding quiet prayers as they tugged the final loops. They would recite blessings like, "May these knots hold firm through joy and sorrow," or, "As these laces bind, so may your hearts entwine." Their whispered words slid into the lace alongside the fibers, intertwining faith and romance. And sometimes the laces carried tiny tokens hidden in their loops, a delicate flower petal, a scrap of parchment with a love note, or a minute lock of hair from someone dear. In one recorded case from Normandy, a bride found a single poppy seed tucked in her corset lace, an emblem of remembrance, meant to keep her thoughts gentle in times of hardship. The placement of the knots also mattered. Some traditions insisted that the central-most knot wear ribbons, crossed at the small of her back stood for unity. Others decorated that knot with a small bead of colored glass, believed to catch light and ward off jealousy. If a jealous friend or rival dared to glance too hard at the corset, that bead's gleam would reflect their envy back onto themselves. But love knot laces weren't solely for brides. In certain guild towns, husbands returning from long campaigns would carry special laces married men's ribbons tied with their own set of knots. They would remove these upon their return and present them to their wives, who sometimes wove them into a keepsake pillow or a small purse. Each knot, untouched by fresh hands, held the story of separation and reunion. There were, of course, playful variations. One prank, common among mischievous sisters, involved adding an extra, meaningless knot near the top. The bride, unaware, might gently tug at it later, discovering only that a small loop of lace came free, an unexpected loop of laughter. A reminder that love, however naughty, should never lose its lightness. Over time, as corsets evolved and lace patterns became more decorative, the symbolic knots lost prominence. But in the Middle Ages, they were central to the ceremony final acts before the bride faced her husband's gaze. When she turned, her attendants often stepped back with a collective breath, the corset's knots tight and secure, the bride poised in stillness as the groom offered his admiration. And what of the untangling? In some traditions, the laces remained tied for several days, sometimes until the first official meal as husband and wife. Only then would the groom, with careful hands, loosen each knot in turn, saying the same blessings whispered during tying. As each loop unwound, it released the tension of ceremony, inviting the couple into the relaxed intimacy of married life. In more playful customs, the bride would be blindfolded for the untangling, relying on the groom's guidance, his hands finding each knot in the dark. If he untied them correctly, she would laugh with relief. If he fumbled, she might give him a teasing pinch, another knot of affection tied in jest. By the time the laces were fully undone, the couple had shared yet another ritual of trust. Every knot tied and untied had been a thread in their unfolding story, weaving the private language of their love into the fabric of tradition. So as you drift closer to sleep, let your mind's eye roam over those delicate ribbons at the back of a gown, a line of tiny knots that hold more than fabric. They hold heartbeats, whispered hopes, and the soft strength of vows intertwined. And in each loop and pull, love remains gently bound, ready to be unfurled in the quiet dawn of a new life together. As morning light begins to wash the walls of the bridal chamber, dusting the furniture with its golden hush, another quiet custom is underway. While the house stirs with servants preparing breakfast and guests rubbing sleep from their eyes, the new bride, still wrapped in the warmth of sleep, and silk reaches beneath her pillow for a bundle left the night before. It's time for the opening of the bridal pouch of secrets, a small but powerful tradition found in many corners of medieval Europe. What is a bridal pouch? Not a purse, not a dowry sack, and certainly not a coin purse tied to the hip. This was something far more intimate, a soft cloth bundle, hand-stitched and slipped under the pillow or mattress, containing tokens meant to protect, inspire, and guide the bride through the mysteries of early marriage. The pouch's contents were never public. In fact, it was considered bad luck to show its contents to anyone, not even the groom. Mothers, grandmothers, or wise women from the village prepared it in secret, often working late into the night before the wedding. The items they chose were as varied as the regions they lived in, but each one carried meaning as precise and layered as a folktale. First, there was often a handwritten charm or blessing. On a scrap of parchment, carefully rolled and tied with twine, might be words like "to calm storms, stir sweetness," or "to steady hands in sorrow and open hearts in joy." These weren't religious in the formal sense, more grandmotherly poetry than sacred scripture. Sometimes they rhymed, sometimes they didn't. What mattered was intention. Beside the parchment, you might find a dried flower or herb, Lavender was a favorite, its scent soothing and long-lasting, believed to guard sleep and keep away intrusive dreams. In some parts of Bohemia, brides were given lemon balm for clarity of thought or time for courage. In the Highlands of Scotland, a thistle bloom might be pressed into the pouch, spiky and wild, a reminder that strength often wears a rugged coat. Coins were common, though not always silver or gold. A bent copper coin, rubbed smooth from years in a grandmother's apron pocket, held more charm than any gleaming florin. One tale from a Flemish village tells of a bride who received a coin with a tiny nick at its edge. She was told that if she ever felt betrayed, she should run her thumb over that notch and remember, nothing in life is whole, but even broken things can be strong. Another treasure might be a button from the bride's father's cloak or a bead from her mother's wedding dress. These heirloom trinkets weren't just sentimental, they were protective. Like personal amulets, they grounded her in her family's strength and kept her anchored through unfamiliar tides. In some regions, a miniature mirror was folded into the bundle, no bigger than a silver coin. But it wasn't for vanity. The mirror was said to reflect only the truth. If the bride ever doubted her worth, she could gaze into the glass to see herself as her family saw her, whole, brave, loved. And because it was so small, only one eye could look in at a time-forcing stillness, focus, presence. Other brides found symbols of fertility or fortune-tiny carved rabbits, a ring of wool, even a small crust of dried bread. One unusual example from an Italian hill town describes a pouch containing a single white feather wrapped in parchment. The feather had been plucked from a dove during the bride's baptism and preserved for this day. The note read simply, "May your heart remember to fly." Sometimes a personal note was included, just a few lines from a sister, aunt, or friend. It might recall a shared childhood memory or offer advice couched in gentle humor. Remember to laugh even when the porridge burns. Or, if he forgets your birthday, hide his boots. These tiny notes made the bride feel less alone, especially if she was marrying into a distant household or relocating to a far village. The pouch itself was just as meaningful as its contents. Often stitched from scraps of old garments, a swatch of her christening gown, perhaps, or a square of her mother's old apron, it served as a fabric family tree. Embroidered initials, simple decorative knots, or symbols like hearts, stars, or trees might be sewn on the outside, adding another layer of story. Some pouches were scented stuffed with dried orange peels or cloves to perfume the bedding, bringing sweet dreams. Others were plain and unassuming, wrapped in layers of waxed cloth to preserve the mystery within. But all of them were sacred. The morning after the wedding, the bride would unwrap the pouch alone. She would sit on the edge of her new bed, fingers tracing each object like pages in a secret book. This ritual was a kind of mental armor, a silent education, a soft voice in the quiet that said, "You are not the first, and you are not alone." What happened to the pouch afterward? Many women tucked it into the folds of their wedding gown and sealed it in a chest, to be opened again years later, perhaps on the birth of a first child or the eve of a daughter's own wedding. Others wore it as a hidden amulet, pinned to the inside of their bodice during difficult times. One Germanic custom involved burning the pouch's contents on the couple's first anniversary, letting the smoke carry thanks to the ancestors, and freeing the items to return to the wind. But most often, the pouch was simply kept quietly, reverently, as a symbol of love's earliest guidance. So as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift into the gentle murmur of dreams, imagine that bundle resting beneath soft linen, nestled close to a bride's heart. Each token inside, each thread and curl of dried flower, whispering, "You are loved, you are seen, and whatever comes next, you do not face it alone." A hush falls over the courtyard, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the warm night breeze, and the distant cry of an owl perched on a crumbling turret. The wedding feast is long complete, and now the world outside the bridal chamber feels suspended, its edges blurred by moonlight and hush. In that space, as the bride and groom settle beneath their flower-strewn canopy, a new ritual begins. Midnight lullabies and blessings, a sequence of soft songs, whispered prayers, and gentle invocations designed to carry the couple into their first shared night and beyond. Imagine a small circle of women mothers, aunts, older sisters, gathered outside the door. Each holds a tiny lantern or a sprig of rosemary. Their breath shows in the cool air as they murmur together, drawing deep, steadying breaths before beginning. Their voices rise in a low, rolling melody, one line answered by another, weaving a tapestry of sound that drapes around the bed like a silken shawl. The songs themselves are simple, verses passed down through generations, often in archaic dialects or with half-forgotten words that feel like secrets. A common refrain might go, "Sleep, sweet dove, sleep beneath the stars. Let moonlight guard your gentle hearts. May angels whisper blessings near, and dreams of love draw ever near." Two soft jokes slip into the melody, one about the groom's tendency to snore like a contented piglet, eliciting a shared chuckle, and another about hoping the bride's castle of curls doesn't tangle the nightingale's song. These light moments remind everyone that even in sacred rites, laughter is part of protection, joy itself, a ward against sorrow. As the lullaby drifts upward, one woman steps forward with her lantern held high. She cleanses the air with wisps of frankincense or burning lavender, moving in slow circles. The smoke curls around the doorway and drifts toward the bed, carrying its fragrance like a promise. Lavender's soothing scent mingles with the night air, and even the owls seem to hush in respect. This fragrant veil is thought to guard the couple's sleep, keeping nightmares and unwanted spirits at bay. Next, a midwife's soft voice rises in prayer, an intimate blessing not meant for the ears of the crowd. She whispers names of saints famed for protection, snipping names like rosary beads. Saint Cecilia, guard their harmony. Saint Margaret, shield their hearth. Saint Leonard, watch their bonds. Each invocation is followed by a gentle tap on the doorframe with a small silver bell, its chime a punctuation mark. It sends the prayer onward. The bride feels the faint ring against the wood, the physical echo of each blessing. Then comes a lull in song, and one of the elder women produces a small drum, not more than the size of a dinner plate, its hide stretched taut. She taps a soft, irregular beat like a heartbeat slowed by contentment, while another hums a melody underneath. The combined rhythm and tune cradle the bride's pulse, guiding her breath into a slow, dreamlike tempo. The groom, feeling the vibration through the floorboards, relaxes his shoulders, his hand finding hers beneath the covers. Between songs, the women exchange quiet lines of protective verse. May the moon's pale light keep your path in sight. May the stars recall the love that binds you all. It's said that these lines, spoken softly into the night, imprint themselves on the very air, so that any wandering spirit passing by might pause, nod, and drift on, leaving the couple undisturbed. As the clock of the chapel tower strikes midnight, if a tower there still stands, the ceremony reaches its climax. The women place their lanterns at the feet of the door, forming a gentle row of guardians. Each lantern bears a name, one for health, one for joy, one for children, tiny sentiments inscribed on the glass and wax. Candlelight spills through the door's cracks, pooling on the stone threshold like liquid gold. Now, in a final gesture, every woman takes a pinch of sacred dust, often finely crushed rosemary stems or a blend of thyme and rose petals, and scatters it through a small opening at the door's top. The dust drifts down in a soft shower, settling on the canopy and bedding. It's a benediction in miniature, each mote a fragment of care and wisdom from every woman present. Some grains land on the bride's slipper, others on the groom's shoulder. None miss their mark. The lullaby begins once more, slower now, each note diminishing, like embers fading in a dying hearth. The last lines are sung only by the eldest midwife, her voice trembling with age and love. Rest now, your vows are sealed. In sleep's embrace, may all be healed. Her final beat on the drum taps 4 times, some say for earth, air, fire, others for faith, hope, charity, love, though no one argues the count. The sound resonates, then stops. Silence follows, deep and complete. The women stand, extinguish their lanterns one by one, and slip away into the night, carrying with them the residual warmth of song and prayer. Inside, the bride and groom lie still, a scent of lavender and incense heavy in the air, the memory of lullaby echoing in their minds. The gentle weight of blessings rests on their shoulders like a soft cloak. It's a moment of transformation. The couple moves from ceremony to rest, from public vows to private dreams. The night becomes theirs alone, cradled by the collective care of every whispered note and soft prayer. And as they drift into sleep, they carry with them not only each other's warmth, but the enduring resonance of traditions that bind hearts across centuries. The soft breath of dawn curls around the castle walls, and the first birds begin their tentative songs as if clearing their throats after a long silence. Inside the now silent bridal chamber, the couple stirs beneath a heap of woven covers and linen, the first rays of golden light catching on the edge of a carved bedpost. Yet before the day truly begins, one last tradition awaits: the ceremonial breaking of the night bread, a curious ritual blending symbolism, superstition, and surprisingly chewy bread. Yes, bread round, coarse, and often stale. But before you dismiss it as mere breakfast, know that this loaf was baked with great purpose. In villages across medieval Europe, it was believed that sharing bread at dawn bound the couple's spirits together, not just in life, but across dreams, seasons, and even into the afterlife. This wasn't just food, it was a living vow with a crust. The loaf, called night bread or bryd o nacht in Old Saxon dialects, was prepared by the bride's family and kept secret until the morning after the wedding night. It was made with honey and a touch of salt sweet for love, salt for endurance, and sometimes infused with herbs like marjoram or dill for luck and vitality. The flour used came from grain blessed at the village chapel, milled during the waxing moon to harness nature's growing power. Before the couple rose, an elder woman, usually the bride's mother or the village midwife, would quietly enter the chamber. She would set the round loaf on a carved wooden board, sometimes adorned with 2 interlinked circles or a braided knot symbol. Alongside it, a small knife and a cup of warm mead or milk rested, ready to accompany the ritual. The couple would sit together on the edge of the bed, still cloaked in sleep's warmth, and place one hand each on the loaf. With eyes closed, they would silently reflect on the night just past, not necessarily the details, but the feeling of stepping into a new chapter. Then, without words, they would break the bread between them. Crumbs scattered, a soft crack sounded, like kindling snapped in a quiet forest. They didn't eat it immediately. First, each took a breath and looked into the other's eyes. This gaze was part of the spell. To make the bread sacred, the love had to be seen. Only after that moment of connection did they eat slowly, thoughtfully, letting each bite carry weight. It was believed that the way the bread broke told a story. If it split cleanly, the couple would enjoy clarity and strength in their marriage. If it tore unevenly, they might face challenges early on, but grow stronger together. And if the loaf crumbled entirely well, that usually meant someone had forgotten to feed the oven properly. Still, even crumbs carried blessing. Sometimes the loaf contained a hidden token, a bean, a dried cherry, or even a sliver of pressed flower petal. The finder of the token would be the keeper of the hearth, the one tasked with remembering love's quieter duties, like mending socks, calming tempers, or restocking the jam jars. After sharing the bread, the couple would dip their fingers into the cup, usually milk sweetened with cinnamon or clove, and mark a cross on each other's foreheads. Not a religious act, but a symbolic sealing of dreams. It was called the Mark of Rest, meant to bless the mind and keep it open to joy, even in the face of future burdens. Only after this would the door be opened. Guests waited outside, hushed and half curious, eager to offer morning congratulations. But no one entered until the couple broke their bread. It was a boundary, a line drawn around their night of transformation, respected by everyone from bishops to barefoot siblings. In some towns, the leftover crust was buried under the doorstep of the newlyweds' home, like a seed planted for future blessings. In others, the loaf's base was crumbled into the hearth to keep the fire of their bond alive. There's even one Germanic tale of a nightbread that grew mold in the shape of a heart and was kept under a glass bell for 50 years as a proof of undying devotion. As times changed, the breaking of the bread evolved. In some regions, it was replaced by cake. In others, by a shared apple or an exchange of kisses. But the heart of the act, the stillness, the sharing, the simple breaking of something made with love, remained. By the time the bread is gone and the last sip of milk swallowed, the sun has fully crept across the floorboards. The sounds of morning carts rattling over cobblestones, distant laughter, clanging pans begin to swell, gently nudging the couple toward the day's responsibilities. But for one long, lingering moment, they remain in their quiet sanctuary. The ritual complete, their hearts marked and filled, their journey begun not with trumpets or feasts, but with shared silence and soft crumbs on their fingers. And as the chamber door creaks open and the outside world tiptoes in, they carry with them the warmth of the nightbread, the last spell of their first night, tucked safely in their bellies and their bond. And now, dear listener, with the last candle long extinguished and the chamber quiet once more, we leave behind the wedding feast, the ancient songs, the whispered blessings. The halls of memory grow dim, their echoes soft as a breath on glass. You've walked with us through cloistered passageways and velvet-draped rooms, through laughter shared beneath ivy-covered arches and tears wiped away by candlelight. You've stood at the threshold of sacred rites, where garlic nestled in gowns and spirits whispered their approval through cold midnight breezes. You felt the lace tighten across a young woman's back, heard lullabies echo under beams soaked in centuries of joy and sorrow. Now it is time to rest. Let your breath slow. Let the world of old gently fade. The rustle of silks, the scent of rosemary, the hush of old stone corridors, all these now drift like petals on still water. You are safe, wrapped not in armor or ribbon, but in the warmth of knowing that even in the quietest corners of history, love whispered soft spells to guard the heart. The past may be dusty, but it has always known how to dream. So rest well, wherever you are under city skies or country stars. May your sleep be wrapped in garlands of time, your dreams laced with silver thread, your spirit calmed by lullabies sung long ago. Close your eyes now, traveler, and sleep.